We are going to turn the page here now to the center of geopolitical controversy, at least this week, and that is the potential meeting between Kim Jong-un, the president of, or the head of, I should say, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or North Korea, and the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. That could be coming up in Vladivostok maybe sometime soon. And we are very, very happy to be joined as we continue the conversation by Brian Becker, who, among other things, is the host of the Socialist Program, whose video version airs here on Wednesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Brian, thanks so much for being with us.
Great pleasure. Thanks so much.
Well, great to have you here. And as you could probably tell in my intro, part of the thing I find so interesting is it hasn't even been confirmed that Kim Jong-un and Putin are meeting. I mean, it seems I could see them meeting. It certainly seems like something that would happen. But just the possibility of them meeting has become this huge story in American news, driven by the New York Times, CNN, and the like. And I just wonder, from your perspective, why is a meeting between two neighboring countries' leaders such a big deal for the U.S. media, even before it's 100% confirmed?
Well, the U.S. never wants to miss an opportunity to caricature and demonize both Kim Jong-un. So the two of them possibly meeting together, you get, your double your money's worth. I mean, you can demonize both. And the fact that that they're meeting together, let's face it, guys, Russia and the DPRK share a border. I mean, if the United States actually met with the president of Mexico or the president of Canada or the prime minister, I mean, would it be like such a big deal? But the story here is that should they meet, and that they might be meeting, again, it's all from the Western media. It's from the New York Times and other Western capitalist media. Even RT, the Russian media outlet, the English language media outlet, is covering it from the point of view of what the New York Times is reporting. So there's not independent verification. But, the reality is that Russia, and before it was Russia only, when it was the Soviet Union, also shared a border with the DPRK and had a close relationship with the DPRK, as did the People's Republic of China. When the U.S. invaded Korea in 1950, and the U.S. destroyed everything in the country, more than 4 million Koreans died, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica in 1967. The U.S. pilot's main complaint was that there was nothing left to bomb, and that was by January 1951, because they bombed everything. And they kept bombing for 2 more years, even though there was nothing left to bomb. At that time, the DPRK, North Korea, basically fought the United States and its allies to a standstill and drove the United States back below the 38th parallel, where U.S. troops continue to occupy the Korean Peninsula today. And it did so with the assistance of China. China sent more than 1 million soldiers, volunteers, to fight against the United States, and with ample military aid and economic assistance from the Soviet Union. So Russia, formerly the Soviet Union, and China and the DPRK share a border. China also shares a border with DPRK. They have had a long-standing relationship. It was only really in the 1990s when basically China and Russia basically turned their back on the DPRK, sort of let the DPRK face the might and attacks from U.S. imperialism almost by itself, that relations between Russia and China and the DPRK deteriorated, but they never broke. And so what we see now is that DPRK will meet again with Russia, presumably. They did so when Putin and Kim Jong-un met in 2019. Again, the U.S. media is making a great deal out of it, as if DPRK is going to provide the necessary ammunition so that Russia can continue its war. By the way, everybody, the DPRK military budget is not larger than the New York City Police Department budget. It's $4 billion. So wow. The Russian military budget is $60 billion. The United States military budget is $880 billion a year, more than 10 times the size of Russia. So again, the U.S. media is making a huge deal out of this. But we can see, of course, Russia and China have come back to the DPRK. I think it was quite unfortunate that they, in an effort to appease the United States 25 years ago, basically sided with the United States and allowed North Korea to become more isolated. But North Korea proved that it can sort of stand alone if necessary.
You know, Brian, it's interesting. and not at all unpredictable. It's very predictable, Jake Sullivan's response to all this, which was to wag his finger and say that if North Korea dares to give Russia weapons, there will be a price to pay, because America is apparently the global police, and only America and its allies can arm Ukraine. Russia's allies are not allowed to arm Russia, or else there's a price to pay. It seems like a very fair game they're playing globally. But you know what I want to ask you about, Brian, is speaking of the way this is being framed, particularly the fact that Russia has also proposed a three-way naval exercise with North Korea and China. So this is also, of course, getting a lot of attention in the U.S. media. And it's being framed as like, oh my God, these three evil countries doing naval exercises together, or coming together, or having any sort of, trilateral agreement of any kind happening in response, by the way, to US, Japan, South Korea having their trilateral alliance, which is very much a military one in an effort to surround China. I mean, the hypocrisy of all that is just incredible. But I guess my point I'm raising here is, in so many ways, isn't this just a reaction? Like, isn't the US literally creating what it fears most and then complaining about it when these countries are just reacting to what it's doing?
Yeah, the US officials seem to have the position that when we strangle you, when we try to destroy you, the only way that you can retain an honorable position is to not fight back, to allow yourself to be destroyed. And that's basically the logic. If countries try to defend themselves or block together in mutual defense, the United States considers that an act of aggression. In other words, you're supposed to just be destroyed the way the Iraqi government was destroyed when the Iraqi government was literally disarming itself on on March 19th, 2003. They were showing we're good guys. We're going to keep disarming. At the moment that the George W. Bush administration unleashed the shock and awe invasion of Iraq. And a year before that, Rania, on January 29, 2002, George W. Bush, at the State of the Union message, declared that Iraq, Iran, and North Korea were an axis of evil. And everyone knew at that time that the U.S. was preparing to invade Iraq. And so the logic for North Korea was they're going to invade Iraq, which disarmed itself. Then they're going to come at us and at Iran. And it was at that moment that the DPRK, which had had pretty good relations in the last year with the Bill Clinton administration, Madeleine Albright, then Secretary of State, actually visited Pyongyang right before Clinton left office, and there was talk of normalization. But when Bush did that on January 29th, 2002, 1 year before the invasion of Iraq, North Korea left the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT. It said we're going to start getting nuclear weapons. It did build nuclear weapons, and it said we won't be Iraq. We are going to demonstrate that we are going to go down fighting if you intend to take us down. You're going to pay a price. And so North Korea became a nuclear power because of the hubris and arrogance, just like the hubris and arrogance that you're, referring to now. The North Koreans were like, no, we're not going to be Iraq. We are North Korea. We fought you in 1950 to 53. We fought you to a stalemate. We're not going to be destroyed by you. And they became a nuclear power. And for a while, China, which was mainly hoping to appease the United States, and Russia, which was still weak after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and thus was also appeasing the United States, agreed to sanction the DPRK when it started building nuclear weapons. And what we see now, 20 years later, as U.S. animosity and hubris and arrogance and aggression against China and Russia have pushed these countries back into that historic alliance that was so obvious in the early 1950s. So not because they wanted to have hostile relations with the U.S., China and Russia basically have no choice because the U.S. has decided major power conflict is the new priority for the Pentagon, targeting Russia, targeting China. And so the two of them look now to DPRK and say, well, we're not going to continue to isolate you. We're not going to play the game of the U.S., of U.S. imperialism. We can't appease them because they won't accept appeasement. So we'll block together. And as you said, Rania, when they do so, and again, after South Korea, Japan, and the United States, Biden administration met with these other major powers in the Pacific to form an alliance against Russia, against North Korea, and against China. After Biden did that, and Putin says, okay, well, we can reciprocate. We can form an alliance or forge a deeper alliance with the DPRK. And Xi Jinping has also been meeting with Kim Jong-un 4 times in his first, in the period between 2017 and 2020. Then the U.S. says, see, Russia and China are evil, bellicose, aggressive players in the world situation. Again, it's topsy-turvy. It's Alice in Wonderland. But if anyone has any degree of objective faculty, you can see how this is actually played out.
You know, this is a big topic, of course, and there's so many elements of it. But one of the things I think, you know, and everything is, of course, relative is, you know, when you travel around the world, in the global south, especially in Latin America and Africa, you know, there's a lot of respect for North Korea that I think would surprise many people in the United States. But I mean, you know, in the ruling parties of Mexico, Brazil, Uganda, Zimbabwe, Senegal, Ethiopia, Vietnam, Cuba, India, I mean, all of them, like, you know, important people with large followings, it's not rare to see them say at least something somewhat positive, and in some of those cases, very positive about North Korea, despite all the demonization we've seen here. So as someone who's actually been to North Korea, Brian, more than once, I mean, I'm curious, you know, what do you think it is that people in the global south see that makes them, or at least some of them, reject, you know, a lot of what's coming from the Western media that they themselves are also consuming, saying that this is the world's worst country?
I think, Eugene, it's important for Americans especially to understand, because Americans generally don't get it. But the colonized world, and that's the majority of the people of the world, the people who lived under this vicious, undemocratic, the opposite of democracy, colonial rule where foreign powers loot and plunder and pillage and enslave your people, those countries, those populations in the world look to North Korea, not because they necessarily love Kim Jong-un or because they themselves happen to be communists or, you know, camp followers of the Workers' Party of the DPRK. No, it's because North Korea said, we will not be colonized ever again. We will not submit ever again. They are the sort of the embodiment of sovereignty and independence for the colonized part of the world. And so the people in Africa, Middle East, and Asia, they're not thinking, oh, DPRK is terrible because they don't get to vote every 2 or 4 years for some corrupt politician in one of the 2 ruling class parties in the United States. They don't think of it that way. They think like DPRK is a proud country, a strong country, a dignified country, a country that will not be dictated to. Even when Russia and China sort of abandoned the DPRK for those years, when DPRK had to stand alone, the DPRK was like, okay, we'll stand alone. And when you think about the adroitness and the diplomatic skills of the North Koreans, the fact that they were sort of the target in the crosshairs of U.S. imperialism and their basic core big allies abandoned them. And here they are in 2023. They're not destroyed. They're not split apart. They're not broken apart. So the people in Africa, especially, and I think other parts of the global South, they look at North Korea and they say, yes, these are people who stood up to U.S. imperialism and they won't be pushed around. I was in DPRK 10 years ago when the 60th anniversary of the signing of the armistice that brought the conflict to an end. People around the world know something also the United States population doesn't know. In May 1953, the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the Pentagon unanimously agreed that they would start dropping nuclear bombs on China and North Korea unless North Korea came back to the armistice table, signed a deal so that the U.S. could end a military conflict that the U.S. was losing. The North Koreans did not want to come to that table. They wanted, like Ho Chi Minh, to fight and fight and fight until they expelled the invaders. They knew the invaders would ultimately, and their soldiers would want to go home, and their soldiers were home. So they were going to win. They were going to win the Korean War. They were going to reunify the Korean Peninsula. But I think the Chinese government was fearful. It had just succeeded in its revolution and probably pressured the DPRK to sign an armistice agreement that took place, again, 60 years ago when I was there in 2013. Now it's 70 years. But the people of the third world, as we used to call it, or the global south, they see this determination on the part of the DPRK. That's what's most important to them, is this determination to be a free, independent, and sovereign people, no matter what the odds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Brian, I am curious because there's so much shifting in the world order right now, especially with the expansion of BRICS and just watching so many countries, as it's an increasingly multipolar world, feel they at least have leverage to, pursue a bit of a more independent path, even slightly more than before. The U.S. is certainly in like a bit of a weakened position compared to 5 years ago or just a few years ago. And that with that sort of all in the background, what is the significance of this particular meeting between the Russians and the North Koreans, with all that in mind?
Well, I think the North Koreans, and I want to make sure the audience understands this, the North Koreans basically want a peaceful relationship with the United States. When Trump met with Kim Jong-un both at the Singapore summit in June 2018 and then in Hanoi in 2019, and the Singapore summit that was signed in June 2018, North Korea said, we agree, one, to have peaceful relations, normal relations with the United States. Two, we agree that there should be a stable, lasting peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. And number three, if those two conditions are met, we will commit to working towards denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. So North Korea basically still wants good relations with the United States, but it's the United States that won't provide good relations with North Korea. I mean, Trump was ridiculed by the Democrats and Republicans for daring to talk about peace. I mean, I think Trump just wanted a Nobel Peace Prize because Obama had one. But whatever Trump's motivations, the North Koreans were willing to come to the table. Now, if you're going to threaten North Korea, if you're going to simulate their destruction, which the U.S. does with massive war games twice a year, I mean, literally simulating the destruction of the country, North Korea is going to look to Russia, look to China and say, look, we have a mutual problem. We have a common foe. That common foe is the arrogant, hubris-driven U.S. imperialism. Let's stand together. We've always been willing to stand together. You, for a while, abandoned us, but we've never wanted to abandon you. So I think the big picture, as we see BRICS and the development of what people are calling multipolarity, is that the world values the idea of independence and sovereignty and not having to live on its knees and follow the dictates of U.S. imperialism. Not because different countries are communists or socialists or exporting world revolution. They just don't want to be treated like they're like in a semi-enslaved population. No one does. No one wants to live like that. And the countries of the emerging global South, they're saying we're strong enough now. We can be, we can flex some of our own muscles, and we're going to have at least, I would say differentiation in the way the world economy develops. That could be very promising for the DPRK.
Mm-hmm. Well, as always, Brian, really appreciate you joining the show and helping us sort through all of this. And of course, you are the host of the Socialist Program, which everyone can check out here on Breakthrough News, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time every week. But thanks for being with us.
Thank you.